Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at one of my model airport dioramas, and that is the diorama representing what I've called Wright Field Municipal Airport, an airport representing somewhere in the United States around the turn of 1960-ish. Now in fact this is the first video which I filmed from the new hangar space, and this is Terminal 2 in the new hangar space, and it is the area which I've been able to find a space for one of my model airport dioramas, being Wright Field. My much larger Jinglong diorama is in the garage and still needs a bit of work putting it together, but this is the first time in quite a long time that Wright Field has been out on display, and I've set it up here with models that represent that period from around 1959, 1960, when the jet age was just getting going, so mostly piston prop liners, but a few jets and turboprops. And I wanted to give a tour of the field to show off its features, and also to show some of the changes that have been made since I first constructed this model airport way back at the end of 2015, which actually was even before yesterday's Airlines came into existence. So the field has undergone a few modifications since then, and a few upgrades, but this is the first time for a long time that it's really been able to be displayed in its full glory. So let's take a look around the model. Now, before we get to the model itself, I should point out, obviously, that anyone who reads my work and checks the website knows I've got a large collection of American airlines, lots of jets, but also as many piston prop liners as I can pick up for classic airlines from the US regulated Airline, United, Eastern American, TWA, Northwest, so on and so forth. And so it's really good to be able to have somewhere to display some of those aircraft on a model. And you don't see a lot of models from this sort of era. Most models that I see nowadays of airports are modern airports, and you very rarely see anything which is classic. Now, the inspiration for this model airport actually came when I acquired this wonderful book by George Searle. Now, if you've not heard of George Searle, then he produced a wonderful series of books like this, which have this kind of rather rough and ready style, but are chock full of information. Now, he produced a lot of these books related directly to individual airlines, mainly American ones, but I also was very lucky to be able to acquire this book, which talks about, as it says here, a pictorial history of airline service at Atlanta. And it covers off the different airports which Atlanta has had. And there have been 3 different airports, all roughly on the same sort of site. Obviously, nowadays we've got Hartsfield, which is super well known, and there's always been an airport that I've been really interested in. I even built a Shabak version of Hartsfield once. But looking back over the older airports that Atlanta has had, and it's had some really interesting airports, and the one which dates from this period is the one which I've tried to kind of mirror in its feel. And you can see here from these images roughly how the airfield looked. It had, as you can see down here, these 2 rather odd gangly piers pulling out from a rather rough and ready terminal, which is based on an old Quonset hut from the Second World War. And you can see that there's just lots and lots of prop liners rather haphazardly parked around the edge of this very thin pier, which is just a single level, and the passengers just have to walk out to the aircraft. And so this is the sort of feel that I was looking to get from my own model airport. Capture this kind of raw look that prop airports would have had at the turn of the end of the 1950s and into the early 60s. So that's kind of what I was aiming for, and what I hope I've been able to capture through my model of Wright Field. So if we begin with a look from overhead, a kind of bird's eye view of how Wright Field looks, you can see that I've had to make the airport smaller than Atlanta was even back then because I just don't have the space. But hopefully I've captured the feel with this long, thin pier coming out from a rather Quonset style terminal. which has this dog leg in it at the top. And coming out of both ends of the main terminal building, you've got a long, thin pier with aircraft parking positions, rather rudimentary. And then moving along towards this end of the airport, the pier gives way to a hangar. And then the newest addition, which was only added probably I think in 2020, is this remote parking space over on the right hand side, which I mainly added just to kind of be able to give and produce better photos of this portion here, because otherwise it kind of just ended and you couldn't get that kind of feeling that there was any perspective or anything further away from the terminal. So that's a rough overview of the field. It's got this one L-shaped pier, two long thin piers reaching out from the edge of the main terminal, and this engineering and remote cargo space. So taking a closer look at what we've got here, I mean, there are different aspects of the original Atlanta field that I was really keen to be able to represent with this model. One of those is just how tight the parking was at these sort of early airports, especially at this point in time where traffic was growing heavily, aircraft size was growing quickly, and they were really jamming in the aircraft. So even though this looks very tight here and you've got multiple prop liners, this is actually nothing compared to a lot of the pictures that I've seen where you'd often have all three of these sets of lines completely full of piston prop liners turned around just like this, and really close together, and there's no real markings for the positions they should park. It's very much kind of jam them in where you can. So even though this does look tight, it's really nothing compared to what I've seen in a lot of pictures where, as I say, you'd have all three of these lined areas here full with parked aircraft. Now, what we've got on display here is mainly a selection of Aero Classics, because as always, Aero Classics produces far and away the most prop liners, and even where they're not Aero Classics, like the Electra there, then it's using the Aero Classics mold. So at this portion of the airport, we've got a selection of the US trunk airlines, which may have visited with individual services. So we've got a Continental DC-6 there, American Airlines turboprop Electra, and a couple of United DC-6s and 7s, and a Capital Airlines DC-4 and Viscounts. And then we've also got a couple of local service airlines here with some of their latest tech, Convair that they've acquired from the trunk airlines. And we've got a Mohawk and a North Central. Now, typically you probably wouldn't have a large number of separate local service airlines serving the same airport because of the whole nature of their route networks, but North Central and Mohawk may well have served similar airports since they were quite close together in the area. So anyway, in terms of what we've got here, I mean, the construction is quite simple. As you can see, we've got the grass is simply some of this sort of grass you can get from model suppliers that's usually used for kind of train layouts. The tarmac itself is painted, and then so are the lines. We've got some cardboard barriers and a wood terminal. Most of the GSE you're seeing here is Aero Classics, and the light pylons are actually 500 scale, not 400 scale, but they fit very nicely for this kind of model, and they are by Herpa. The background is simply a spray painted board with some cutout scenery to make it look a little bit deeper, and I quite like the effect here. It's working quite nicely. So we've got a very busy ramp which gives way to the main terminal area, this Quonset style hut, which isn't too dissimilar to the sort of thing which the original Atlanta airport actually had. You can see that, as with most older airports, something which is missing nowadays, we've got a visitor terrace. So you've got some people sitting here on the terrace. looking out, waving goodbye to their relatives as they fly off in their piston prop liners, which is great. You know, they work quite nicely. And then as we move out onto the pier, you can see again similar kind of detailing, wooden piers with paper associated to them on the sides, and some parking for some of the smaller aircraft like DC-3s, which there just aren't enough in this scale. Then as we move out to the periphery of the pier here, we begin to come across the first jets, which are represented here by a Delta and an Eastern DC-8. And this interesting structure here, which looks very unusual, has got two air bridges kind of grafted onto a chunk of terminal, which itself has kind of been just laid on top of the original pier structure. And this actually resembles quite closely what was built at Atlanta in about 1959, when they introduced the very first air bridges. They had this odd gate layout because nose-in parking at this point in time was highly unusual. The first class for propliners was always at the rear, and so you didn't have nose-in parking typically at airports at all. And just to illustrate what I mean, this is the structure which was built at Atlanta. You can see how rudimentary it appears, but you can also see that you've got the two DC-8s, in this case both Delta examples, parked very close together at right angles to each other, with very short air bridges, and this two-level structure kind of attached to the original single-level structure. And that is the structure which I've been trying to replicate here at the airport. So you can see we've got the little gate control house as well above it, and again, when you move over, hopefully this gives you the same sort of flavour at my model airport as we actually had at the original Delta of this time. Now obviously this is once again an Aero Classics DC-7, but interestingly the DC-6 around the corner from it is a Gemini model, one of the few they've made of a piston prop liner. Decent mould, except slightly nose high. But you can see that in keeping with most airports at this time, at Wright Field, the props are arrayed around the pier side on, so there's easy access to the rear of the aircraft, where as I said the first class cabin was, and obviously with the props at the front it's a lot safer to board your aircraft from the rear. Moving past this to DC-6 and Convair, then there's an interloper from the northeast with a Sunliner DC-6, and then another Convair and one of Eastern's early prop jets, Lockheed Electra, sitting next to a beautiful super Constellation. And at the end we've got a sole gate for Transworld, where they have one of their early Constellations. Now over towards this side, as we've shown before, we've got the maintenance hangar, and here we've got a Delta Curtiss C-46 Commando waiting some cargo, but we've also got a variety of Eastern piston liners awaiting their maintenance, or some cargo in the case of this ship Eastern Super Constellation. And expanding out a little bit, you can see we've got a Northwest DC-6 taxiing in, and then the remote space which has been added about a year or so ago. Some parking here with a Flying Tiger short nose Super Constellation, very underused mould that by Dragon Wings sadly. And then in the background we've got a remote space for piston liners, with another DC-6 and a Super Constellation parked up. So hopefully this gives you a good view of what I'm trying to achieve here and how this relates to the original Atlanta airport that it's based on. Also how easy it is to build your own model airport. Really doesn't require a lot of computer skill. In fact, I haven't really used any for this because it's all been built manually. Just requires a little bit of paint and some raw materials, and really very simple and easy to produce something which still looks quite good, I think. And hopefully gives that kind of authentic feel which you might have got if you'd have ever visited an airport like Atlanta at this sort of period in time, which of course I never did since I was born in the 70s. The late 70s. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this look around my Wright Field model diorama. It's a really cool little layout that I really enjoy looking at. It's difficult to keep all the dust off it, and I don't generally have aircraft out on displayed on it, but it's a great diorama. You can really mix and match it with most prop liners, and it certainly fits quite nicely actually as a Canadian field. Just need to slightly hide some of the American logos and things. But I think that it fits and could pass quite nicely for most airports in North America during this period, the late 50s and early 60s. And you can always take off the gauge gates and make it look a slightly older airport dating from the early 50s if I need to. So it's quite a flexible layout too. Cool, well, hopefully that's something you've liked looking at, and it's given you a bit of inspiration for building your own dioramas. Obviously, check out my other channels on Instagram at Yesterday Airlines and on Facebook at Yesterday Airlines. Obviously, the website yesterdaysairlines.com. And Wright Field itself nowadays has its own website, so check that out too. You can find the link from the Yesterday's Airlines site. So I will hopefully be updating that site regularly with new pictures, new images of the layout in different guises with different airlines showing on it. So please keep an eye out for more of this material if you enjoy it. Chuck the video a like and subscribe to my channels. Thanks very much for watching. That's it for this video from Yesterday's Airlines. I'll see you next time.